Good day, students. Today we are starting with the next interesting chapter, Cell, the Unit of Life, from the unit Structure and Function. So what do we mean by a cell? Well, biology says that it is the fundamental unit of life, and our generation has taken it very seriously, and that is quite true. Okay? But in this chapter, we shall be learning about that cell which led to origin of life. So, today's video explains about the introductory part of this chapter and also overview of different types of cells that are present in the nature. Now, when we read any storybook, we see that each story have many sentences, right? Each sentence will have many words and each word will have many letters. That means each and every object which surrounds us is made up of some basic simple entity, and that entity is called as unit. Okay? So, our body is also made up of certain basic units called as cells. So, how many cells do we have? 1, 2, hundreds, thousands, millions? Well, it depends on the type of organisms that are present based on the number of cells. So, organisms are divided into two types, unicellular and multicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms have single cell and multicellular organisms will have many cells. Okay? So, unicellular organisms, since they are single in nature, they are independent. Okay? Their existence is independent. Well, they are also said to be immortal. That means these organisms can live forever. For example, I will take this circular paper as one of the unicellular organisms. And we have seen in biological classification that these organisms divide into daughter cells, right? So, if we consider this as one of the parental cell dividing into two daughter cells. So, where is the parental cell that is existing here? Further, these two cells, daughter cells, will get matured and they will divide, right? So, therefore, there is no natural death that is occurring in these organisms. These cells will perform all the functions. Okay, since they are unicellular. It may be digestion or locomotion or excretion and so on. So, all the physiological activities are carried out by the single organism. And since there is the heavy load of work, their lifespan is said to be shorter than that of multicellular organisms. In multicellular organism, there are many cells that are present. So, therefore, here there will be group of cells which will form tissues. Tissues will form organs. Organs will form organ system. So, we see here that there is division of labor. So, some group of cells will perform the function of digestion. Some will carry out the function of locomotion. Some will carry out the function of excretion and so on. So, there is proper division of labor that we see. Okay? Therefore, their lifespan will be more than that of unicellular organism. Further, if there is any injury in any of the cells, these cells will be replaced by the other cells. That means the function which was carried out by this cell will be taken up by the other cells. Okay? And therefore, the survival rate is more in multicellular organism compared to that of unicellular organism. Why? Because in unicellular organism, if there is any injury, that will directly lead to death of that organism. Okay? So that was about the unicellular and multicellular organism. So we come to know that the cell, since it carries out all the metabolic activity, physiological activity, all the functions, and therefore we say that these cells are building blocks of life. So they are fundamental structural unit of the living organism. Okay? But how the study of cells started, or who discovered these cells? For that we have to look back into the history. In 1665, an English scientist, Robert Hooke, designed his own microscope and observed certain things. One of the observations which he did was in cork slices that looked like honeycomb and having the thickened wall, and these slices were empty inside. So for him, these slices were like empty rooms or empty compartments with the thickened wall. So he called these structures as cells. If the cells are empty inside, then how we can say that origin of life began from these cells? In 1676, a Dutch businessman, again he designed his own another microscope, which was called to be the simple microscope, and it was the outstanding contribution in the field of science. And he observed the dental scraping, and he saw certain cells having some life in them. So therefore he called these cells as living cells. He studied the protozoa, bacteria at that time along with some RBCs. Okay? And since he was the first one to identify these unicellular microscopic organisms, he is known to be father of microbiology. Microbiology is the branch of biology that deals with the study of microorganisms. In 1838, a German botanist, Matthias Schleiden, he identified different types of cells in the plants, and he proposed that all the plants are composed of different types of cells, and these cells forms the tissues. A year later, in 1839, a British zoologist, Theodore Sitchin, identified different types of animal cells, and he explained that the animal cell have some outer thin covering or layer, which we now call it as plasma membrane. Also, he distinguished the plant cell with that of animal cell, that the plant cell have a unique feature that is absent in animal cell, and that was the tough covering called as cell wall. So he proposed his hypothesis that the bodies of all animals and the plants are made up of cells and the product which are formed from these cells. Okay? Both Schleiden and Sitchin, they proposed the cell theory based on the findings which they had done in plants as well as animals. But somehow they were not able to explain how the new cells are formed. In 1835, Rudolf Virchow, a physician and pathologist, also known to be father of pathology, was first to explain the cell division. So he proposed his theory as omnicellulae cellula, that indicates that new cells are formed from the pre-existing cell, that means from the parental cells. Okay? So Rudolf Virchow modified the cell theory that was proposed by Schleiden and Sitchin as all living organisms are composed of cells and the products of these cells. Second, all cells arise from pre-existing cells. Okay? that is called as the cell wall. And this cell wall is absent in animal cell. Here, the cell wall has some cytoplasmic bridges called as plasmodesmata, from which the exchange of the ions or minerals will be done here. Okay. Second difference what we see that it has large central storage bubble-like structure called as vacuole. Now such vacuoles in some of the animal cells are absent, and if they are present it will be very small in size. Okay. Third difference is about the organelle called as chloroplast, which is very important to carry out photosynthesis. And we know that plants are autotrophic in nature. These organelles are absent in animal cell. Anyways, animal cells are or animals are heterotrophic in nature, right? So these are three characteristics which we see in the plant cell and they are absent in animal cell. Now we'll just look at the animal cell. Here we see that there are some organelles called as lysosomes that have some digestive enzymes to carry out the digestion process. So such organelle is absent in plant cell. Another difference what we see is non-membrane bound organelle called as centrioles that play a very important role during the cell division. That doesn't mean that plant cells do not undergo any cell division. There are some small microtubules which will help in the cell division. Third difference what we see that most of the animal cells have flagella. Okay? And such flagella is present only in the gametes of the plant. Okay? So we see that there are three again differences which are present in the animal cell and absent in the plant cell. So we should remember these absence of certain characteristics. Okay? Now the characteristics that are present in both plant cell and animal cell is there is the organelle called as mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum and nucleus that is present in the fluid matrix called as cytoplasm. Okay? Other than these organelles, there is also non-membrane bound organelle called as ribosomes that are present in both these cells. So all these organelles are present in the cytoplasm and the cytoplasm is lined by a thin membrane, selective permeable membrane called as plasma membrane. So this is the overview of both plant cell and animal cell. But based on these absence or presence of certain characteristics, can we say that in nature these are the two types of cells? No. There are two major groups of cells, eukaryotic cell and prokaryotic cell. We had already discussed about the difference between these two cells in biological classification. So prokaryotic cell, as the name says, it is the primitive nucleus. Definitely these organisms must have evolved first and then followed by eukaryotic organism. So in prokaryotic cell we have seen that DNA is naked. That means what? It doesn't have any histone proteins associated with the genetic material. Also we have seen that there is no membrane or nuclear membrane present and that is called as nucleoid. Whereas in the eukaryotic cell there is the true nucleus with the proper nuclear membrane. Moreover, the DNA or genetic material is also associated with the histone protein which gives it a compact structure. Okay? Then also we had seen that the membrane bound organelles are absent in prokaryotic organism but they are present in the eukaryotic organism. Right? Here the similarity what we can see is the presence of cytoplasm, presence of plasma membrane and also non-membrane bound organelle that is ribosome that is present in both the cells. Okay? are the eukaryotic one, whereas all bacteria come under prokaryotic one. So based on the absence and presence of characteristics, we can differentiate the bacterial cell, plant cell or animal cell. When we say multicellular organism having many cells, does it mean that all the cells will be of similar kind? No. They will have different shape, different structure, different size based on their functions which they will be performing. Similarly, in unicellular organism also based on the function, the size and the shape depends. Okay. For example, mycoplasma, which is the smallest organism, bacteria, which have the size of 0.1 to 0.3 μm or micrometer. 0.1 is one of the example, that is PPLO, pleuropneumonia-like organisms having 0.1 micrometer size. Bacteria is 1 to 5 micrometer in size. The average size of eukaryotic cell is 10 to 20 μm. Ostrich egg cell is the largest cell in nature. The size of human RBC is 7 micrometer. The shape of these cells is biconcave, round. Okay. The longest cell in the nature is the neuron. Okay, it has the branched structure and elongated structure we can see here. Human sperm or human egg is also having different shapes. So we see it is not only the size but also the structure varies from cell to cell. White blood cell have amoeboid type of shape, whereas the epithelial layer, columnar epithelial layer have column, narrow column like cells. Okay. So we see that the cells having different function or performing different function will have different types of shapes. Okay, they can be polygonal, columnar, elongated, tapering. Okay, then cuboidal, disc-like structure, circular structure, thread-like structure, irregular structure, and so on. Okay. So this is all about the introductory part and overview of different types of cells by which we can differentiate these prokaryotic cells, eukaryotic cells, and also between plant cell and animal cell. Okay. In the coming videos, we shall be discussing in detail about each and every